Hello, everyone, and welcome, and thank you for being here and being interested in applying for this wonderful fellowship. We also have a former fellow here who I'm hoping be able to talk to you a little bit more about her own experience working on her project. But before that, the project I plan to work on for the next 2 years with a wonderful team of students is entitled Dehumanizing War. I'm in the right frame, sorry. It's a Dehumanizing War, Artificial Intelligence Weapons, and the Future of the Human Species, right? What it means to be human in a context where weapons and warfare or it's becoming increasingly, automated, right? Increasingly intelligent on its own accord. What does that even mean? So that's a larger question we will be grappling with over the next 2 years. So let's kind of quickly go over some of the key points so that you have a sense of what artificial intelligence is and how it plays a part in transforming a warfare, contemporary warfare, and also what's happening or what's going to happen potentially in the future. All right, so when we hear about artificial intelligence, when we hear about robotic warfare, usually I think what we think of is the film Terminator. I don't know how many of you watched it. It might be too old a film, but in my growing up years, it was the film, right, that we thought of when we thought of automated wars. So there is this sense that slaughter bots or killer robots usually do tend to remind people of science fiction, right? And when we think of science fiction, we often think of something that's fictional, right? That's not real, that's in the future, perhaps, but it's still not happening right now as we speak in the moment. And therefore, the assumption is that these lethal autonomous weapons are future weapons, and we do not need to worry about them right now. But of course, what I'm trying to get to is that this is an incorrect assumption, right? That these weapons that autonomously select, target, and kill humans on their own accord are actually already here, right? And they're amidst us, and they're transforming what we think of war, how we do warfare, and how we end up killing and maiming and decimating communities and so on and so forth. I'll get to that part. So the first time, in 2021 report by the UN panel of experts in Libya documented the use of autonomous weapons. Thankfully, those weapons did not kill anyone, right? So there's no record as such yet that shows that autonomous weapons have actually killed anyone yet, right? But the fact that they're around and they're being deployed during warfare is increasingly becoming a major concern for many human rights activists, for many advocates around the world, many legal experts, ethical experts, a range of people who are very invested in making sure that we do not proceed with any more research, deployment of artificial weapons in war. But of course, the industry experts have already labeled this the third revolution in warfare. The first two, as you know, were the gunpowder, that you might or might not know, gunpowder and nuclear power were the first two revolutions. So this is being pitted as a third one, right? And this is something that obviously a lot of industry experts, a lot of defense experts are also deeply excited about. It's interesting when you talk to AI experts, when you talk to legal experts, they will claim, right, that it's very difficult actually to define what an artificial intelligence driven weapon is. It's not an easy definition. It might seem easy to us, but it's actually not that easy to define, because for them, guided missiles could also have AI capabilities, right? And so could landmines, because they work with sensors and they sort of work on their own, right? So it's not very clear, actually, when we do some more research, it's not entirely clear what these weapons are quite yet or what the kind of technology deployed is. But there's a general sense that when we talk about AI-enabled autonomy, it means that the weapon is really a tool of, it's autonomous tool of warfare, because what it does, it searches for people, targets on its own accord. It decides to engage them. It could also obviously obliterate human life completely without human involvement. Now, this is a very tricky thing, and that's part of what our research will delve into. How do you even begin to imagine a weapon killing people without any human involvement? I mean, what does that even mean? Because at some point you have to have humans involved. I mean, even at the experimenting stage, the research stage. So this is a very tricky terrain, what it means to think about weapons completely without human involvement. And it raises a lot of legal, ethical conundrums that I'm hoping we can delve into as a team. So again, for the sake of clarity among legal experts, among regulatory bodies that are talking about these weapons in international forums, one of the ways they define the AI weapons is, to sort of cut out the noise and cut out the complexities a little bit about, how do we even define it? What they say is fully autonomous weapons that select and engage targets do so without meaningful human control. So the word meaningful becomes very key to that. Again, a range of meanings about what is meaningful, who decides what meaningful is, who decides what that meaning is, so on and so forth. But generally there is a sense that without meaningful human control, these weapons can, as I said, take these autonomous decisions to kill, exterminate people. And this is for the first time that we see unmanned military drones, for example. And unmanned military drones are not necessarily AI powered. I mean, there's these very interesting distinctions between a drone that is unmanned versus an artificially intelligent weapon that just takes over, right? That just takes charge of the mission from a beginning to the very end. But it is for the first time that you see that in these weapons, the decisions are obviously not made by humans then, they're made by algorithms, right? And people know what algorithms are. They are basically a series of instructions, very specific instructions that you feed into a computer, and the computer then takes over, right? So at some level, of course, there's a human doing the algorithm, but again, that part, for the sake of clarity in international regulatory conversations, is left out. And what they focus on is more on how do we define what this meaningful human control is. Is that clear? So far, so good. Any questions I can answer thus far? No? Please feel free to, this is not a lecture. I just want to kind of introduce the topic to you. And I'm really interested, obviously, in your questions. So what do the industry experts say? How do they sell these weapons? That's the other important dimension we do need to acknowledge and we need to recognize. So for them, they will argue that, well, you know what, AI weapons are actually great, because they tend to be more precise. So you only kill who you're supposed to kill. So machines are somehow smarter than humans, is essentially what they claim is, right? And so they will argue that these are weapons not of mass destruction, but of precise destruction, right? So this is a very interesting sort of humanitarian ring to why there is so much research and emphasis on developing more of these weapons because of its humanitarian dimension, because of how human these weapons are. They're more human than humans, actually. And that is the claim, right? They tend to be more human than human because humans can make mistakes. But guess what? Machines barely do, which is another claim that we will engage with more deeply. Is that true? Is that not true? Why is that true? Why is that not true? And then a lot of experts argue also that because they're so precise, they are able to uphold the statutes of international humanitarian law more than human-led warfare is. Again, it's a very complicated domain. What is international humanitarian law? It's basically law that governs the conduct of humans during warfare, right? So the claim is that weapons tend to be more human, more precise, more targeted. Therefore, we can obviously kill less people. You can imagine a lot of people are not happy with those claims, right? And they put forth what they argue are the moral dimensions of using AI weapons, that, algorithms to kill, it's a grave threat to national and global security because the machines take over, and what happens, we don't know. We cannot predict what these machines will end up doing. Machines are incapable of comprehending the value of human life, they argue, right? So there are a bunch of critics who will say this, that how would a machine comprehend the value of human life? And they argue and they claim very explicitly that this is morally repugnant, right? We cannot let artificial intelligence-driven weapons shape the future of warfare. And as a result of that, shape the future of humanity, right? So we cannot let that happen. So there are a lot of these moral debates about whether or not we should even encourage these weapons. Of course, what I'm working on in my research is with organizations, regulatory bodies internationally, such as the Stop Killer Robots campaign. I've already sort of started working with them, interviewed them now a few times. And what they are calling for internationally is a ban on autonomy in weapons systems, right? For them, though, it's very interesting. They're not against autonomous weapons entirely. What they're arguing is, remember, the definition of AI weapons is meaningful human control, right? If you do not have a meaningful human control, then that's what AI weapons are. To the extent that there is some meaningful human control, they stop being AI weapons. It's a very strange legal definition, right? A very kind of, what you call a fluid definition, right? That can change depending on the context. But for this context, for the legal context, what they want is not necessarily a ban on not a ban on artificial intelligence. They want that humans should exert a little more control in deciding when and where to use the weapon, right? So as long as they have some meaningful human control, they're okay with it. Again, I mean, for grabs, is that the right way to go about doing things or not? Separate question that we will hopefully research through this project. Any questions? Yes.
Do you say we have any connections to this campaign?
What's
or
that?
Did you say that there would be any connections to this campaign? Or are you working like autonomously?
Autonomous. That's a great. I actually, so for my larger research project, I am working with them, but not with them in the campaign, but working with them to understand how they define artificial intelligence weapons, what kind of regulatory norms do they want to establish. As an academic, I'm also very interested in engaging what are the limitations of a campaign like this, right?
So would you examine weapon systems on a case-by-case basis as they start to be produced or already existing systems?
I mean, that's an interesting question. I mean, that's the part of my project I haven't fully developed yet, but I do plan in the next few years, because part of my larger project will be to work with labs that are invested in producing these weapons. So the science side of things is also something I'm very interested in. But yeah, for example, the Boston robotics lab, right, in Massachusetts, their dog, I'm very interested in that dog. And I'm hoping I can get some access to folks at the Boston Robotics, and we can figure out what the dog is and what the dog is doing. But that's part of, so yes, I'm very interested in particular weapons that are already there or are being designed for future use. That's a great question. Any other before I move on? So, right. Okay, so the other problem with campaigns like this, the Stop Killer Robots campaign, is that there's a very limited understanding, right, of where these artificial intelligence weapons get deployed, or where artificial intelligence gets deployed, period, right? So there is a sense that artificial weapons are only deployed during warfare, right? That we only need to focus on warlike situations and figure out how we can regulate the use and deployment of artificial intelligence weapons. But the fact is, there are also non-lethal uses of artificial intelligence weapons, right? Or tools or equipment. So I am very interested, the project is very committed to also understanding in more broader terms what the non-lethal uses of artificial intelligence weapons might be. So for example, you see the emergence of smart walls, right, as a very important element of how we are now, consolidating and fortifying our borders, southern borders, northern borders, with artificially powered tools and equipments, right? That could be facial recognition, that could be sensors, all kinds of these seemingly innocuous technology, like in our cell phones, right? Which is artificial intelligence, right? And can be used for non-lethal purposes, but also for towards very violent ends against anti-immigration laws, for example. Making sure that we keep certain kinds of people out of our borders, only allow certain other kinds of people. I mean, it's discriminatory, right? It can become discriminatory and often is. Because guess what? People who design algorithms are human too. Ultimately, it's coming back to the humanity of it. You cannot completely dissociate the human elements of artificial intelligence weapons from what the final outcome usually is. So the problem is that an overwhelming focus on the lethal dimensions of artificial intelligence leaves out how artificial intelligence weapons are now uncritically being embraced as a one-click solution to growing problems of immigration, growing problems of crime, gun violence, so on and so forth, right? So there's border-focused AI technologies, smart walls that have supercharged surveillance now, right? It's not just surveilling during warfare, it's surveilling us. And who knows how we're being surveilled. And what that even means for our freedom, for our democracy, for our human rights, collectively and individually, both. And the problem is that the deployment of these technologies is moving so much faster than legal and regulatory norms around it, right? That we don't even know, we're barely able to keep pace with the growing, the escalating use of such technology in our midst, right, on an everyday basis. All right, so some of the research questions that I'm interested in that we'll obviously try to figure out how to respond to as a team to an extent. So what are the social, political, material infrastructures of AI weapons development, and how do AI weapons systems reconfigure global hierarchies of power and knowledge? Now, this is kind of a very broad question. I'll try to simplify it a little bit, because the idea here is, and part of the motivation here is to recognize that at some level, we have to go beyond the legal technical debates, right? That focus overwhelmingly either on warfare, or they focus overwhelmingly on defining what meaningful human control is, because we have to recognize at the end of the day that AI weapons become part of this larger colonial, effort to consolidate the power of some nation states, some communities over others, right? So there's an inherent dimension of power imbalance here that I'm very committed to understand, right? So that goes beyond, that exceeds the legal, political, technological dimensions of AI weapons, and really situates it within the larger geopolitics of colonialism, settler colonialism, racism, right? And so on and so forth. So again, how is this technology impacting communities, not only during war, but also supposedly during peacetime, right? What's happening every day to us, or what is AI doing to us on an everyday basis that's accentuating racial tensions, right? That's accentuating marginalities based on people's class, based on their location, based on their gender, based on their ethnicity, based on their nationalities, so on and so forth. But also very committed to understanding what are people doing, right, to challenge this. To assume that people don't know what's going on is obviously not right, because there's a law that's happening also in Syracuse, surprisingly, right? We don't often pay attention to the kinds of grassroots movements that are happening in our backyards that are actually challenging some of these weapons systems, right? That are now increasingly being deployed also by the police, right? It's not just by the military, but also by the local police. So who does that impact? What are people doing to challenge them? And then, how is this weapon system shaping CNY's, Central New York's sociopolitical economic terrain, with particular implications, again, for marginal communities and so on and so forth. And that's the question we will be focusing on more as a team, right? Because it's about Syracuse. It's also really trying to understand not global weapons or artificial weapons from some distant, abstract perspective, but really kind of understanding how it's impacting us right here as students, but also as part of a larger, wider community that we're all a part of. So why Syracuse? Key site of research and advocacy. I don't know how many of you know this, but Syracuse is sort of situated at the forefront of emerging global conversations on artificial intelligence. Now, the question is, how do we access those conversations? And that's something you'll have to figure out as a team, right? But part of it is that we know, for example, some of you might know that in 2019, MQ-9 Reaper drone was flown out of the commercial airport, right? So there's a lot of our drones from Syracuse being flown into Afghanistan straight from here. Again, not necessarily AI technology, because these are still called unmanned drones, but it's a very fluid distinction, as I said, between what's unmanned and what's manned, what's human and what's machine, right? Because the human-machine interface in these machines is precisely the fluidity of that interface is precisely where all the politics is to a large extent, and that's the stuff we can explore together. There was a crash of an MQ-9 Reaper drone in Syracuse in 2020. Not many people knew about it because it was covered, and nobody actually openly talked about the implications of this for certain neighborhoods, particular neighborhoods that this could have inflicted a lot of damage on, right? So there's that. So what we'll do, what the lender student team will do is develop a series of digital interactive maps using GIS, and we'll figure out what these locations are, right? We can look into archives. We can figure out ways to collect this data. And again, that's something that's an ongoing conversation, and that's something I will need a lot of help with from your amazing individual expertise, right? Some folks might know GIS. I don't know GIS yet. I'm planning to take a few courses, but people who know GIS would be fantastic for this. So I strongly encourage you to apply if you have that expertise. I'm thinking of a way to use these GIS maps to tell stories, right? To include anecdotes from people who are at the forefront of this conversation. And that includes industry experts, but that also includes, for example, people who work with, what's the Lockheed Martin, right? So Lockheed Martin is right here. People are working there, and now I actually now know a few people who do work there. So I'm also trying to build access and connection so that we can include stories of all kinds, right? And figure out what this community is doing together to engage with this, but also doing it in a way that there is no conversation yet. There's no dialogue yet. There's no robust dialogue around what this means for Syracuse going forward. So that's part of it. It's actually quite funny. I wanted to show you this. I don't know if you can. Yeah, can I click on Lockheed Martin because that's a hyperlink? Oh, there it is. I just want to show you how interesting, if you click on Lockheed Martin, I mean, I can live without it. But the idea is Lockheed Martin is obviously very invested in AI, but to me, it's fascinating how, yeah, it's not showing. It's fascinating to me how they promote artificial intelligence. They claim that it's not less human control, it's more human control. It's just fascinating. I'll send you a link for folks who are interested.
I think the link is probably real, but Internet Explorer is no longer a thing anymore.
It's no longer a thing.
Yeah, I think they deleted it.
Oh, well, do we have Google Chrome? I mean, not that,
I can tell you this.
not that it's not like a big deal.
Okay.
But I encourage you to go to the website. And there's a particular page on the website. So if I just go to Lockheed Martin, it might not show up. But I'll send you the link if you're interested. But it's fascinating to me how they represent this sort of innovation as more human-like, right? So that's just something we can figure out what that means and why they represent what they do as more human, as being more human. That's just a fascinating element. Students will also review the relevant scholarship, identify topical themes, and conceptualize digital maps and blog posts to communicate complex data to a larger public. I'm very invested in both teaching and co-writing with people, with students who want to reach a wider audience. So this is not just an academic debate, but it's also a debate that obviously transcends academia, and we need a public dialogue around it. So I think we can collectively think of what it might mean for us to make those kinds of interventions in the public domain. Right, and then there are these contestations around weapons use and manufacture right here in Syracuse. There's a coalition called the Upstate Drone Coalition, again, an organization I've been in touch with now for a few months, mostly because I wanted to make sure, we get access to them and their insights. And they've been doing a lot of organizing in Syracuse against drones. A lot of them were arrested as well. A lot of them have pending court cases. So what I'm hoping some of you will do is collate all that data, right? Get those court cases, analyze court cases. I think that's just an amazing archive to have. That also becomes an archive for the Upstate Coalition. So we are also doing something for them, right? It's not just an academic sort of interest, but it's also in the interest of the larger public. We are creating this archive that can be accessed, because a lot of these court cases and the lawyers that fight for them, that fight their cases, are based in Rochester. So there's an opportunity here to interview lawyers, interview legal teams, also understand how what the legal terrain of this is and what kinds of arguments are being arguments and counter arguments are being made by different parties situated on different sides of this debate. So these are really a bunch of quite amazing, very feisty activists, and I think they're really eager to engage with you on this issue. The other one I was thinking of, I just actually found out about this, but I think it really fits so well with the project. There's something called the Shot Spotter program. I don't know how many of you heard of this, but the Syracuse Police Department is very invested in this, and in large part, the COVID money that came in is now being diverted to expanding this Shot Spotter program. It's basically an acoustic gunshot detection system of microphones, algorithms, and human reviewers that alert police to potential gunfire, right? So there is this triangulation method that allows the police somehow to know exactly where the gunshots happen, and then they rush to the scene, they make the arrests, so on and so forth, right? But it's an AI-powered equipment. It looks very innocuous, actually. You probably have seen it and unseen it because it's so unnoticeable. I'm not. I mean, I barely would have noticed it if I didn't know, but that's what it looks like, right? And the idea is that yeah, this is somehow going to help us both prevent gun violence, but also then arrest our victims, our perpetrators. But you know, this Marshall Project is, this is how I learned about the Shot Spotter program. I met this very wonderful journalist from the Marshall Project a few weeks ago. The Marshall Project, it's a nonpartisan, nonprofit news organization that reports on criminal justice system in the US. And they have been reporting, they've been doing a lot of amazing reporting on the Shot Spotter program in Detroit and Chicago. They're also expanding their coverage into the Syracuse area. So I brought up my project and I was super excited to work with some students, do a collaborative sort of a project where they could figure out what this program is doing in Syracuse with the local communities. And you know, interestingly, it was implemented in 2017 here in Syracuse, but in March, I think, of this year, 2022, yes, they expanded it to the north side neighborhood and covered an additional 2.1 square miles of that territory, which means that they have also started expanding more and more into city surveillance, and certain neighborhoods are now part of that dragnet, you know, surveillance dragnet, if you will. That's what's happening. Anyways, these are some of the learning outcomes, but there could be more. This is my last slide, and then I would love to get questions. So again, I mean, whoever is part of this team will be able to tell stories about what AI weapon systems mean, how are they being developed, deployed, circulated, and how can we use GIS to create these maps to tell stories that are real, that are urgent, right, and that are grounded. There'll be a lot of literature reading as well. So, you know, understanding the socio-political dimensions, understanding how artificial intelligence fits in the colonial political context of the current global world order would be one. How artificial intelligence is affecting people on a day-to-day basis, not only in war, but also in everyday life in cities. And of course, we recognize our own ethical political responsibilities in relation to, you know, whatever is happening. And for me, I'm very committed, right? Very, very committed here. And I'm really hoping I can get students who are committed or more to really understanding how do we interface with the police, right? How does SU interface with the police? And we all know, I mean, there's this town-gown division, and you know, it's obviously often upheld because we have no interaction whatsoever with the larger community. I mean, as an anthropologist, I'm committed to working with communities and making sure that their voices are count, right? So we hear their voices and they're able to present their perspectives. So you guys will be the facilitators for that, right? Whoever ends up being part of the team. And then of course there are these elements of oral history and how do you archive, how do you interview, and all that. And that's something I'll obviously hold workshops on with hopefully some of the faculty at SU. But that's that from my end. So welcome any questions you might have.
I just want to introduce ourselves real quick before we open up questions real quick for those who are here before you have to move on to other spaces. I'm Dr. James Rowling. I'm one of the co-directors of the Linder Center for Social Justice, and Dr. Person.
And hi, I'm Professor Gretchen Purser, and I'm in the Department of Sociology, and I'm the co-director at the Linder Center for Social Justice.
Yeah, and I'll just say real quickly that obviously we're dedicated, and for those of you who don't know, we're dedicated to interdisciplinary conversations and research and supporting research about social justice in its many permutations. And I think some of you are going to find just from this wonderful presentation that there are some things that we haven't necessarily plugged into thinking, oh, that has a social justice application, and the answer is yes. And I'm going to say real quickly that when Dr. Bhan was talking, I'm coming from the arts and humanities storytelling background. I go immediately to thinking about popular culture. And some of you are familiar with the movie Captain America, the Winter Soldier. And if you're familiar with that story, you know, it just makes some immediate connections with some of the terms that Dr. Bhan was talking about in terms of like supercharged surveillance. When does supercharged surveillance move from that to targeting or to profiling? And who writes the algorithm that makes the decision about who gets zapped and who gets, you know what I'm saying? So there's a lot of applications we're hoping that you have an opportunity to ask questions about as a part of this research team. And the last thing I'll say real quickly is that structurally, you know, we support faculty fellows who develop their own individual projects, and then student fellows who will then work as part of the research team to help expand and develop that project and find some outcomes that can be applicable to the world and do some good out there, right? So you want to say something?
Just a couple more things. So we're here to help answer questions along with Professor Bhan. And I also wanted to introduce our other faculty fellow. Can you stand up and introduce yourself?
I'm Jian Li from School of Design. I'm the current faculty fellow for things have been worked out for the last year and a half. Over here today, for projects and they are student fellows.
Awesome. And then also Katie, would you mind introducing yourself?
Hi everyone, I'm Katie Ma. I'm a PhD student also in sociology and the London Center graduate. So if you have any questions and you email the London Center, you're like, feel free to reach out and please have a review.
Okay, great. So we're all here to answer any questions you have about applying for this student fellowship, about the project that Professor Bhan is proposing, and what this student fellowship is all about.
How do you sign up?
The applications are due November 1st. So there is an application that's online. And if you've gotten the email announcement about this event, then there was a hyperlink to the application. So if you go to Lender Center, lendercenter.sri.edu, then you'll find the application there. So again, it's due November 1st. That's the most important thing to know.
I'm seeing a lot of different components to all this. You're looking at international, domestic production, like impact directly on the community and impact on the creators. There's a lot going into this, so I'm curious to know what the scope of the student responsibilities are going to be. And this seems like a very large project, so we're just looking for more details on the specific science.
That's a great question. So yes, so this is my, I'm committed to this project for the next, who knows, 5-10 years. But the idea here is to, for me, to continue doing what I'm doing. But then the Syracuse part of it is what I'm very invested in developing with my students. So the scope of the project for the students will mostly be limited to Syracuse, unless, let's say, we're doing a GIS mapping assignment, right, or research, where we'll have to, for example, collate some archival data. That can become a little more global in scope, right? And then we situate Syracuse in relation to these global innovations that are happening in multiple sites. And again, we'll have to choose some sites because it's happening in a lot of places. There's China, there's Russia, there's India, there's the US, right? There's the UK. So we'll have to figure out what key sites to choose. So that's part of it, right? That's how the global dimension of it will become part of the research project. But then for the most part, what I'm really hoping students can do based on their expertise, and that's why I want to go back to what you just heard about interdisciplinarity. That's really crucial, right? So I'm an anthropologist, but I do need people who understand the human-machine interface. I do not understand that yet. I mean, that's part of what I'm hoping to develop in the next few years, speaking with folks in the lab, in AI labs, right? But I need that. If you have that, if you have a computer science background, I think that'd be fantastic. So for that, I think, yeah, so coming back to your point about the scope. So for the most part, let's say the the Syracuse Upstate Drone Coalition work, right? That's here. That's in the CNY area. And I might need a student or two, depending on, how we design the project collectively to take that on, right? So that would perhaps entail meeting with lawyers, interviewing them, getting their stories down, meeting with activists, getting their stories down. So that's the kind of work that research project will entail. So again, also remember, I don't want to approach it top down. There's a skeleton I have, right? And there's certain areas of emphasis I do want to make sure I present. But within that, I am very flexible working with students to take the project, their own sort of independent projects elsewhere, right? Keeping in mind the larger thematics of the project, of course. So, yeah.
And I want to reemphasize that, because sometimes folks come into research with an understanding that, okay, the professor's going to tell me what to do. And this is a collaborative approach to research, and in general, we've learned that it's really helpful for student fellows to realize that they bring an expertise and a lens that's really helpful to the project, and that can help shape things that weren't anticipated right from the start. And so we bring something to the table, and that's really, really important. Your interest and your observations and so on and so forth. So it'll be team, right? So I just wanted to mention that.
It's a collaborative team.
Just to kind of sidetrack, it'll be all this research and will be under like an activist lens, or is it kind of like impartial research collection and then conclusion, like thought, I guess, like
It's
how
well,
objective is
yeah,
this?
that's a great question. For me, I'm a public anthropologist, and that's how I define myself, which means anything I write is also public facing, right? So that's the idea. I mean, we could do a journal, or let's say you're interested in submitting to a journal, absolutely. I mean, I would provide whatever mentorship is required for you to do that. But then there's also ways to think about public facing scholarship and what that can look like, right? So, yeah, so I mean, in my mind, the activist stuff is good if it's informed by research, right? Solid research is really critical in any kind of an advocacy project. So I don't want it to become a cause without people knowing what they're standing up for, if that makes sense,
Yeah.
right? Yeah. But that's a great question.
I'm interested in this because as you mentioned, that's Afghanistan and nowadays as the US left Afghanistan, they are doing the military actions through drones, and the recent news about in some area. I was like, it was so interested to me that although we don't have a good mapping system, they could target that person very specifically. So I just want to know, like, who are eligible to be part of this research? I'm an international student, a Fulbrighter, so I will be done with my master's by next May. So how long it will take? Will I be able to be engaged in this research?
So next May of 2023.
Yeah.
So it is a 2-year fellowship.
Mhm.
So decisions would be made in December of this year, 2022. But the expectation is that student fellows will be working with Professor Bhan through May of 2024. So it creates problems for people who are here in a one-year graduate degree program or who are seniors.
Yeah, and the problem is that folks separate from the project too early. It doesn't help the team to keep a consistent focus. You lose a member of the team right in the middle of the project. That's the motivation.
So I don't understand those who are new and who they are so that they be here.
For 2 years, sadly, yeah.
I just need to make sure I heard correctly that there's no conflict of interest if we bring our own research interest to the table. So for me, being a literacy education scholar or budding scholar, the extent of, well, the greater conversation or the extent of my research is looking at informational warfare. So I am wondering if that could be something that is applicable to the.
Absolutely. In fact, I didn't bring that up here, but I'm also very interested in the STEAM school, right? And we've talked about that, and I learned it from actually that first meeting we had. But yeah, so information warfare and where that starts and how that is conducted is really interesting. And part of that is looking at educational programs, looking at the kinds of schooling, the curriculum that is being developed both locally, nationally, and globally to normalize a lot of this as just common sense, right? That we have to have facial recognition. Without that, obviously, we're lost. I mean, where does that become common sense? What are those sites where such thinking becomes commonsensical is something, of course, we've been very interested in.
Yeah, there's some research out right now that I've been putting over there with the research about redacting and how that is based on algorithms and who gets to see what information. So I'm looking in my application, but it involves this project to really look at the literacy aspect.
Oh, absolutely. That'd be fantastic.
I'll just jump in on this and apologies if I'm incorrect, but I mean, I think the whole structure of this fellowship is that the faculty fellow kind of creates the broader kind of structure for the intellectual inquiry and what this project as a whole looks like. But the details of it are something that is negotiated with the faculty fellow and student fellows after they're selected, depending upon the skills and the interests that they're bringing to the project. So there'll be lots of negotiation and dialogue and discussion about the precise details of the project once that selection process.
I could also add on that, just talk about what we're doing right now. So for our project was about helping the Northside community. And so I'm the design school. I know nothing about research. I'm interior design. And so I took a class about refugees, and it really just like opened my eyes to this refugee crisis that's happening right in the North Side. So for me, what stuck out to me was helping refugees, but there's other people working on food banks, and Anna's working on the Latino community. Maybe she could share something too about that. But it's really about what you're passionate about, and then your wonderful faculty will help you and support you with your research. But basically, you're just working as a team with a general goal of how do we help the world, I guess, or this community.
And to expand on that, with what Dr. Lee brought to the table for the literature art forward, it was mostly concentrated on the north side because they identified within that world center that there is an issue with access to the center and engagement with it. And as part of the recruitment process, the Lender Center identified people that were actively involved in some type of community center outreach. So first, for example, express their interest in refugee people in Syracuse and how they have access to wellness. And I personally work very closely with Advocacy for 2 years now, and I've always been very interested in nonprofit work in community centers as wellness. And we managed to connect that initial objective in that research with our interest, because community centers, if you look at it, it is a way for those refugees to find wellness. And we're just trying to make those connections prevalent and provide solutions to that access to wellness.
This question right there.
So you mentioned mostly about the public and just like the campaigns and the social aspect of the research. I'm like particularly interested in analyzing the algorithms of the technical part. Is that like still integrated in the research, or are you just like primarily focused on the social aspect of it? That's one question. And the next question is, what's the maximum amount of students you're looking for?
5. So that's the easier answer to that. The second question, I'm looking for 5 students. So it is really a team of, that works collaboratively across multiple differences, which includes disciplinary differences. So I think, let's say, what's your major? Yeah, so that's great. I mean, I would welcome somebody from computer science because it's also for me an opportunity to learn from my students. So this is not just as we've heard, and I hope I made that clear. It's not top down. I'm also in this to learn how people think in computer science because that's a huge part of it. What is 1.1010? I mean, it makes no sense to me, to be honest, right? As an anthropologist, I mean, I would like to know more about what does the programming part of it look like? Because that is where the politics actually is, right? We might not see it that way, but a lot of the work that I've been doing now, it's also on indigenous communities in the United States trying to redefine algorithm design. And their claims is that we need a seat at the table at the design stage so that the 1010 looks like, it's inclusive. It doesn't criminalize us already based on seemingly innocuous numbers. So no, I'm very interested in getting somebody from computer science and learning from them.
We talked a little bit about the time commitment in terms of like the length, but what specifically in terms of time commitment per semester, or if there'd be like summer availability requirements? I'm in Maxwell's IR program, which necessitates an internship in the summer, whether or not that would be a theme. Master's, yeah, correct.
So they actually went on to go and they actually took away. But it doesn't mean so we took care of that over the summer. So when we actually got back together, there are always things that you have to do.
Right.
And I think it's weekly meetings or bi-weekly meetings.
Well, I mean, I can't really say for all the coursework, but we set up our every Friday we for 2 hours. That would be like a good decision.
And I think that in the past, there's been somewhat of a reluctance to specify exactly how many hours per week the student fellows work because it depends on the project. It depends on what you're doing. But I did speak with another previous faculty fellow who really strongly encouraged us to convey an expectation of something in the order of about 3 to 5 hours per week, or the equivalent thereof over the course of the semester.
Yes.
You might have mentioned this, but I missed it. Is your research directly tied, or is it like in relation with a national project?
No.
And is there some sort of relation to it, or is it like?
No, there's no relationship as such, but for that one component of the project with the students, I do want to develop that a little more. Yes. So as such, there is no relationship, but it could evolve into something. I mean, that's the beauty about research. It evolves based on a lot of these serendipitous encounters, right? I mean, I just happened to meet this wonderful journalist who was in town, and I got really interested in what they were doing, and they could utilize some help too. because we're here and they have to travel all the way. So I think there's ways for people to align on similar interests and projects, but as such, there's no relationship as such as of now. But it also depends on the student, right? I mean, that's, I think, a key part of it. Let's say you want to work with them and you want to then figure out ways to continue to work with them. I think that'd be fantastic, but that's not necessarily built into the structure of the fellowship as such.
Is the project open to first year students?
I
Yeah.
think so, yes.
First year, meaning like undergraduate?
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. And in fact, we do, there's like, Sam was referring to earlier, there is a possibility for additional funding through SOURCE, which is the undergraduate research arm of the university. And they're especially interested in supporting first year students, figuring out ways of incorporating more.
I was wondering how the selection process was going to look after the submission of the application. Will there be interviews with the members sent to testify?
Well, it's not so much interviews, it's, there is an application that, and there's a written piece to it. We will take a look and do some ratings in terms of the strongest applications. And of course, Dr. Bhan will have a view on at some point select, but they'll actually go pretty quickly. And for the, once it before the end of
Before the end of the term.
yeah.
Because we do want to hit the ground running next semester. Yes.
Are there any like presentation or like symposium opportunities?
Oh, right. Yeah, no, that's a good question. We should have talked about this. So the end of the second year is when we are expected to organize a symposium around this issue. So I think the student fellows, not I think, I know the student fellows will play a very instrumental part in both organizing that and leading it too, with people who you want to invite, who we think would be great speakers. So I think there's a lot of work to be done at the end of that, at the end of the fellowship, to make that sort of splash publicly on, you know, what you guys have done, showcase the work, and really kind of figure out how to keep the work going forward for each one of you individually, and of course for me as well.
That's why it's wise to really look at this as an extension of your work. It's your interest, because it's part of your career arc as a budding scholar, whatever career you're entering in. That symposium is going to be, you know, a feature on your CV as well. So just make sure that it really dovetails with your interest.
It's a great question. Yeah.
My last question, just based on the outcomes, is this a mixed method or just quantitative?
Mixed method, I would say, yes, because I think we'll need to maybe do surveys as well, right? So there's going to be quantitative stuff as well. I would like that. Yeah, so mixed methods, and also multimedia.
Can I ask, like, just by a show of hands, how many were graduate students? And then, yeah, and then how many were undergrad? Good mix.
It's, given this is actually a really good gathering. This is also robust attendance, so I appreciate it.
Yeah, sorry. Is this, you have like the 5 fellows, is it collaborative or are they all working in as like an independent study and utilizing each other's resources?
Well,
It's definitely collaborative. I mean, it's a team.
it's a team.
It's a team.
Under one common, so they're all working towards the same research question?
The umbrella question. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, the larger
Mhm.
sort of premise of the project based on what we just talked about. But again, so depending on what your interests are, it could be that two people are invested in the same project, right? So let's say there's two people doing the ShotSpot, two people doing or working with the Upstate Drone Coalition. So there's possibilities of that teaming up to handle different components of the same project. There's depending, again, it's very open-ended until we know who we have and what kinds of conversations we can actually pursue. Yeah, but it's still very open-ended.
I'm working with a partner right now with our project that has gotten very large. But we have a similar goal, so that's why it worked out. But it's definitely collaborative in that we all help each other with each other's projects and share information where we can, where someone might have knowledge and someone might not. Like for me, I know that I'm interior design, so I do a lot of graphic design, so I help with the posters, flyers, and stuff like that. Where the graduate student, she's studying research, so she has a lot of background knowledge with that. So definitely a lot of collaborating, but focusing on your skills where you're best at and your background knowledge. But I have another class to get to, but if you guys have any more questions about what this entails and what the hours are going to be, you can, I'm sure the Lender Center will connect us. I'd be happy to answer any questions over email or talk to you if you have any concerns. Hope you guys all apply. You should definitely, I applied on a whim and it was so worth it.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for coming. It is about 12, so I don't know if others in the paper, we're available for more questions.
Thank you.
Yeah, we hope you all apply.
Yeah, it's fine. November 1st. And we've taken your email, so we will follow up with you directly to make sure you apply at the deadline.
Yeah.
And please help yourself to coffee, drinks.
And if you want to reach out to me directly, feel free to do so. If you need to ask me more questions,